Release That Witch. Audiobook, Part 67.
Chapter 925, The Air Defense System. Roland had mentioned several problems that needed to be solved. The lack of an air defense network was as big of an issue as the transportation problem. The importance of achieving air supremacy stuck in his head. He had learned this lesson from the history of the wars in his previous world. An army who had the aerial advantage was always able to launch an attack from any point at any time, and before the invention of the radar, no one on the ground was able to detect enemies coming from the vast sky, let alone defeat them. Bearing that in mind, he planned to enhance his army's air defense capabilities as soon as possible. Otherwise, he would never be able to build an artillery position near the Tequila ruins. He guessed that after Lorder's escape from their pursuit, the demons had probably flown to the border of the western region several times to investigate, and they would have likely concluded that most of the residents of Neverwinter were common people. That was why they thought they could repeat the old trick that they had used in the first Battle of Divine Will. The demons' investigation teams had somehow managed to avoid the sentry posts in the impassable mountain range as well as the gods' punishment witches who had gone deep into the barbarian land. If Sylvie had not taken over the scouting job, the frontier guards would not have been able to detect the approaching demons until they came near the city wall. The battle on the city wall had highlighted what was lacking in the current technology, and proven that the sky had already become the biggest vulnerability in Neverwinter's defensive line. After all, the people in this era could hardly imagine aerial forces, let alone countermeasures for aerial attacks. Roland had been pondering over the air defense problem ever since the moment he had seen the demons with their flying devil beasts, but he had never expected them to come to the city so early. He had not started the development of air defense weapons yet, or even finished building the impassable mountain ground defense line and the telephone network. The fact that the frontier guards had not been able to shoot down any demon or devil beast during the earlier incident did not surprise him at all. It had been his decision to use revolving rifles to fill up the blind zones of the machine guns and the cannons for now, and they had proven to be quite effective in suppressing enemies on the ground. However, resulting from the low pressure in the bore, a revolving rifle had a relatively short range and a low accuracy, which became a very serious defect against airborne enemies. Furthermore, its hit rate was low and its firepower was limited, since each of its cartridges could only contain 5 bullets. Last but not least, it had no suitable tripod or aiming tool for targets in the sky. With these defects, it could hardly serve as an ideal ground-to-air weapon. He felt that he had better begin to replace all the revolving rifles with bolt rifles. It was already part of his plan, but Anna was unable to mass-produce that many parts that were necessary for the large-scale production of the bolt rifles. Given that, he had only equipped the sniper team with bolt rifles for now. Fortunately, the workers had started to get familiar with the operation of the new machine tool which was put into use recently, and they were already able to assemble rifles on their own. Once they could improve their work efficiency and guarantee the quality of the products, the output of bolt rifles would be substantially increased. Though bolt rifles could shoot farther and more precisely than revolving rifles, they could hardly serve as ground-to-air weapons. Their rate of fire was even lower than the revolving rifles, and their tracer ammunition, which had a complex structure, was not easy to manufacture, especially when the ammunition production line was already working at its full capacity. Even if he began to focus on tackling the key problems for the mass production of bolt rifles now, he would need several months to achieve this goal. By the time he succeeded, the months of demons would already be over. Under these circumstances, he decided to create new ground-to-air firearms as the primary air defense weapons and use the bolt rifles to assist these new weapons in a fight. Based on the existing technologies, he was not able to equip his army with any kind of high-tech fire control system, so his only choice was to create a hail of bullets to stop the enemies in the sky. The easiest way of achieving this effect was to convert some of the Mark I type heavy machine guns into anti-aircraft machine guns, which had been a tried and tested solution in the modern world's history and would not increase the burden on the manufacturing and logistics sectors. A Mark I type HMG equipped with an aiming tool and an adjustable tripod would be able to shoot low-flying enemies out of the sky. In any case, his Mark I type heavy machine guns were easy to convert, as he had planned for the air defense usage in advance and had equipped them with air-cooled barrels instead of a water-cooled casing when designing these machine guns. A heavy machine gun was well suited for hitting long-range targets, while also having a remarkably high hit rate at shorter ranges. It fired its shells extremely fast, and thus had overwhelming firepower. With these features, they could effectively suppress the spear-throwing mad demons who rode the flying devil beasts. If the city wall had been equipped with 2 such converted Mark I type machine guns before the previous skirmish, the outcome would have been very different. With this plan in mind, after he concluded the meeting, he immediately headed for the Arithmetic Academy instead of returning to his office. This new academy was located to the south of the Castle District, next to the chemistry laboratory. Most of the researchers working in the academy were the former Astrology Association members. Being venerated as a school of sages, it had recently been attracting quite a lot of the talented citizens who had just completed their primary schooling. It received almost 20% more job applications than the alchemist workshop next door. Roland speculated that the frequent explosions and accidents in the lab might also have played a part in discouraging prospective job applicants. Astrologer of Dispersion Star welcomed him in the main hall. After bowing to the king, the chief astrologer began heaping praise upon the profoundness and beauty of mathematics. "Your Majesty, please forgive me for nagging you. That book you gave me, Analytical Geometry, must the deities work. I had never imagined that I'd be able to see the world so clearly with my mind instead of my eyes. Even if I were to one day become dim-sighted from old age and lose the ability to observe the starry sky, I would still be able to describe the world just as clearly as before. For example, now I can even describe your wavy hair, your clothes, and even your boots using numbers and symbols." Fearing that he would go on and on, Roland interrupted him. "Have you mastered all the knowledge in the book?" "I can't say I've mastered all of it, but I did master most of it." Dispersion Star calmed himself down and continued. "In the past 6 months, apart from the calculation missions you gave us, we've been working on a huge project. We recorded the star's celestial coordinates and our previous observation results in the mathematical language. Now we can be sure that the star of extinction, the bloody moon in your words, always stays at the same spot in the sky. It doesn't move at all." Roland had once paid close attention to the bloody moon, whose coming was said to herald the beginning of the battle of divine will. Now that the demons had already begun to take action, he no longer had any interest in the star. "I've come to give you a new mission. You'd better finish it as soon as possible," he said explicitly. "It's not a pure math problem like the previous missions. You need to solve a practical problem for the First Army." "Do you mean creating something like the cannon's firing table?" "It's more complicated than that," Roland shook his head and said. "You need to work with the craftsmen to produce a tool which can predict the movement of a target in the sky. You'll need 2 equations to describe this kind of movement. One describes the horizontal displacement of the target and the other describes the vertical displacement. I have a general idea of the design, but you have to determine the specific parameters through more detailed measurement and calculation." What Roland wanted was an aiming tool for the new ground-to-air machine guns that could determine a target's distance and forward direction in the sky. With these parameters, a soldier could adjust the weapon to get the proper high angle and advance angle, and then riddle the flying enemy with bullets. This aiming tool was a manually operated mechanical device rather than a piece of electronic equipment, so all that the shooter needed to operate this weapon would be an accurate firing table and some basic knowledge of mathematics and geometry. Chapter 926, Quitting Math for Dummies. The anti-aircraft machine guns were just the first step to enhancing Neverwinter's air defense capabilities. The most effective way to protect the city's airspace was still building a functional air force. Back in the days when the Union had ruled the human world, witches had guarded the skies. A small number of witches endowed with a flying ability, as well as a few extraordinary swearing stones of flight, had performed this air defense task. They had been recognized as the strongest warriors of the Union, and thus their status had been higher than that of the other combat witches in the Blessed Army. According to Pasha, throughout the history of the Union, all the 3 chiefs had always been former members of this air defense troop. As for the common people who did not have the talent to use magic power or the magic stones, the only solution was to create a kind of machine which could serve as their wings. When that happened, they would be able to get rid of the constraints of gravity and fly up into the sky. In order to dominate the battle in the air, Neverwinter had to build up its own air forces. To achieve that goal, Roland needed to create airplanes. This was no easy job, as it involved tackling many technical problems at the same time. He was not familiar with aircraft design, and even the structure of a biplane from World War I was complicated enough to give him a headache. He was able to get away with the simplified power transmission systems and braking systems of the train for the initial prototype. However, the flight control surfaces of a plane could not be half-assed and had a much lower tolerance for error. More importantly, he had never flown a plane and thus had no idea whether the mechanical devices he created would work or not. Fortunately, he could choose another kind of aircraft, the glider. Wendy, who was able to sense wind direction and wind power accurately, could work as his test pilot. With the help of Lightning and Maggie, who could ensure Wendy's safety, he believed he would be able to write a flight manual for the operation of the gliders without risking anyone's life. Your Majesty. Astrologer of Dispersion Star spoke, interrupting Roland's thoughts. I understand what you mean. The Arithmetic Academy will make this aiming tool for you as soon as possible. Good. Roland nodded in satisfaction. He was happy to be able to talk to this astrologer, who could immediately understand his intentions. He felt that it had really been a wise decision to bring the whole astrology association to the Western region. As a school of sages, the Astrology Association also required hands-on practical ability just as the alchemists did. The astrologers were not only excellent at mathematics but also good with their hands. Since no blacksmith knew how to make a telescope, they usually designed and assembled the telescope parts by themselves. Just as Roland was about to leave, he noticed that Astrologer of Dispersion Star still seemed to have something to say. Is there anything else? Roland asked. Here's a thing I can't figure out, Your Majesty. The scholar cleared his throat by coughing several times. I don't understand why there's the word intermediate on the cover of the book, Analytic Geometry, and on every cover of the mathematics books you gave me. Roland chuckled. That's the thing you want to ask? Please forgive me for being so bold, if it's a thing can't be disclosed. Different from Kyle Sichi, Dispersion Star had stayed in the old king's city since his birth. He had served several kings and was always on his best behavior. However, Roland could tell from his eyes that he was just as curious as the chief alchemist. Roland could not help but smile while recalling that he had used intermediate chemistry to lure Kyle into working for Neverwinter. In order to get his hands on the book, Kyle had recruited students, given lectures, and even taken up the post of Minister of Chemical Industry. Nevertheless, Roland felt that he would not need to repeat this carrot-and-stick trick on Dispersion Star. He explained plainly, it's because there's a book called Advanced Mathematics. It's not just about geometry or arithmetics. It's advanced mathematical theory. You can imagine the primary and intermediate books as the trunk of a tree and advanced mathematics as the top of the tree. But this book is much harder to understand, so it has another name. What might that be? Quitting math for dummies, Roland answered with his hands laid out in a shrug. Obviously, Dispersion Star did not understand Roland's implication. He stared blankly at the king, and then he said, Your Majesty. I'll never give up, even if I have to spend the rest of my life to grasp the theory. Could you please show me? Seeing the sincere look on the scholar's face, Roland somehow felt a little embarrassed about himself, since he had regularly dozed off in his advanced mathematics class. He cleared his throat and said, Of course. After finishing this project, you may come to the castle to get the book. Yes, Your Majesty. Dispersion Star knelt and replied with excitement. After that, Roland left the Mathematics Academy for the backyard of the North Slope Mountain. Apart from the anti-aircraft machine guns, he intended to make some special weapons for the gods' punishment witches. After having spent several months together, he was firmly convinced about the tequila survivors' burning desire to wreak havoc upon the demons. Neverwinter had to fight the demons to survive, but the tequila witches just wanted revenge. In the hearts of the ancient witches, the demons had been the source of their pains for the past hundreds of years, the enemies who had killed their families and friends, and the nightmare they longed to get rid of. Roland felt that it would be a complete waste for these mighty warriors to use only swords and spears to fight the demons. He also noticed that they were able to fight with weapons that were too heavy to carry for conventional soldiers. This meant that he could equip them with fiercer firearms and turn them into high-mobility, heavy battle units. His initial plan was to design a portable Mark I type HMG for the God's Punishment Witches, whose ammo box could be carried in their backpacks. With these weapons, the God's Punishment Witches would become mobile fortresses. Once they encountered a pack of demons, they could immediately turn them into Swiss cheese. However, now he had changed his mind. Some heavy machine guns were going to be converted into anti-aircraft machine guns, and a new variant of the Mark I guns would soon begin production on a large scale. In the near future, the bullet consumption speed would be incredibly fast, but based on the current efficiency of Neverwinter's bullet production, he could not ensure the supply of ammunition for so many guns. Under such circumstances, even if he were to manufacture 300 guns for the God's Punishment Witches, they would not get enough bullets to be able to achieve the target effect of a walking fortress. To solve this problem, he needed to create a powerful and simple weapon that used fewer bullets while also being easy to maintain. He quickly sketched the outline of the new weapon on paper. It was a grape shotgun, a gas-operated weapon with a 40mm caliber. The prominent advantage of a grape shotgun was its wide killing range and the long-distance shots resulting from the enlarged caliber. It shot automatically and its shooter did not have to be very accurate. It could help the revolving rifles and bolt rifles in suppressing the enemies who managed to break through the cannon blockade line. It could also be adopted in a sneak attack. In such a battle, the grape shotgun shooter could take the initiative to approach the target. Judging from the demons' fighting methods in the Second Battle of Divine Will, they were still in the era of cold weapons. In a direct encounter, they usually fought hand-to-hand instead of throwing spears. Given that, Roland was confident that the God's Punishment Witches equipped with automatic grape shotguns would be able to give them hell in a close combat fight. 5 days later, Sylvie spotted some devil beasts again. The number of enemies had doubled this time. 12 devil beasts, looking like a dark cloud in the sky, were flying towards Neverwinter. Chapter 927, Air Defense Battle at the Border, Part 1. Roland had added 2 short telephone lines connecting his office with the command center of the Neverwinter garrison and the tequila survivors so that both stations could instantly contact him if the need arises. Therefore, the castle, the camp of the First Army, and the third border city received the news almost at the same time. This happened too soon. Pasha was a little doubtful. Based on our experience, we should have had half a month or even a month before the demons would launch their second attack, especially for a city like Neverwinter since they can't arrive in one day. Why? Roland asked. Because they need time to let the panic spread. By that time, no matter how the lord of the city tries to calm his subjects, it will be all for naught. The second attack would crush the people's confidence and snuff out any remaining hope. That's why they normally waited for some time before commenced the second attack. Pasha explained. The demons seem a bit hasty this time. I see. Roland nodded. Pasha was right. In an ancient city, people were too busy working every day just to feed themselves every day. In such a disconnected society incomparable to the one where Roland came from, 5 days were only long enough for the news to spread among the rats and the patrons of a few taverns. Somehow, the old rumor seemed a bit more credible to Roland now. After all, the demons' strategy was so similar to the humans. It was highly unlikely for them to act so human-like without a human guiding them. What are you going to do? Alethea chimed in. What else can I do? Just kill them all. Roland said decisively. Time seemed very limited. They had only managed to add the new aiming tool on the Mark I HMG recently, and the machine gun squad they hastily assembled only had one trial, with balloons as the targets. But since many witches, including Nightingale, Lightning, and Maggie, had returned, they could now take the initiative to attack. Roland looked at Nightingale and the other witches. Just follow the plan. Remember, the most important thing is safety. Lightning perfectly understands. The little girl raised her hand. Maggie too, coo. Don't worry. I'll take care of these two little ones, Nightingale said, smiling. Who's the little one? Lightning protested, raising her chin. Of course it's you, coo. Why? I'm bigger than the two of you combined after transforming. Coo. Maggie spread her wings. That's not what I meant. The two hadn't even finished arguing before Nightingale picked them both, one girl in each arm, and went out of the meeting room. I'll leave the defense task of the city wall to the witches of the sleeping island, Roland said to Tilly. Tilly answered without hesitation, they'll do their best. Good. Then I shall stand by the phone and wait for your good news, Roland said, and then commanded word by word, move. Now. Pasha did not speak until Roland was alone in the room. Her voice sounded serious. Are you serious about this? The demons would change their mind once they spot so many witches, and they won't see Neverwinter as a city ruled by the common person but by witches. They would then have completely different tactics in store for us. I know. You've already warned me about that. Roland exhaled softly. The ancient witch had told him about her concern when they made the defense plan. In her opinion, if the demons thought Neverwinter was a holy city under the dominion of the Union, they would undoubtedly strengthen their defenses and attack with increasing aggression in the coming battles. In other words, they would start to view Neverwinter as an even opponent. The demons only took the witches seriously and completely disregarded the common people. I thought humans would prefer to avoid a war like this. They'll come sooner or later, right? Roland arose and walked up to the French window and looked off into the direction of the border. Since that's the case, it's better to fight a battle we have prepared for instead of heading mindlessly to war. The First Army is made up of men who used to be common hunters, miners, and farmers, and the army was not exceptionally powerful in the beginning. Now that they have to face an enemy that is not in the least like the ones they faced before, every chance of confrontation would help them gain experience and prepare them for the battle of divine will. The so-called elite soldiers are simply those who have survived several times on the edge of life and death. I must say that your resolve has moved me. Alethea whisked her tentacles. You're better than most of the common people just from this point. Roland shook his head and said, common people didn't earn the label of common people because they're incompetent, but simply because of their large population. Therefore, their strength is often easily ignored. There are stories in the dream world telling of tales where powerful entities, whether they be ancient gods or colossal dragons, underestimated the might of the humans, and ended up being slaughtered by mere 40 ordinary people. I have never heard of such a legend. But they're not entirely false. I dare say that as technology advances, we will only need 25 common people to do the same job. Roland shrugged. Then he turned around and said seriously, furthermore, we can mislead the demons by letting them believe that Neverwinter is a city ruled by the Union. They will conclude that the bizarre attacks they're about to suffer are from the witches' abilities and ignore the most important point: Neverwinter is neither a city ruled by a common lord nor one under the Union's rule. It is an industrialized city that has managed to merge the essence of both. Fishball widened his eyes and stared unblinkingly at the grassland to the north, so as not to miss any sign of the enemies. He had heard of the existence of the demons from His Majesty a year ago, but the first time he saw what they looked like was during the incident 5 days ago. When he witnessed the scene of the enemy's bone spears piercing through his fellow soldiers' chests, Fishball felt the dread he had not felt for a long time flood back over him. No human beings could attack like that. Even the demonic beasts could not threaten the city wall with that huge distance between them and the wall. For the first time since he joined the army, he met an enemy whose range of attack was comparable to that of the flintlocks. However, he failed to strike back due to the limited angle range of his weapon, which made him a conspicuous target to the enemies if he had held his ground on the wall. At that moment, Fishball wanted to run away. But he stayed his ground. It was, at first, his trained reflexes kicking in that prevented him from fleeing, but then, a strong feeling of fury and detestation flooded over him. He was furious about the previous deaths of his companions and his powerlessness. He used to be a wimp that was known for his cowardly nature to people in the old border town. People laughed at him wherever he went, and for a time, he nearly believed that he was a real coward. But that all changed the day Vanner had tricked him to join the then new militia with 2 eggs. In the first confrontation with the demonic beasts on the wall, he was so scared that he peed his pants, but ever since he returned from the wall that day, no one had laughed at him anymore. Now, Vanner was already promoted to the head of artillery battalion, yet he was merely transferred from the flintlock squad to the machine gun squad and became a squad captain. Fishball had neither gripe nor jealousy, for he knew that Vanner was much more capable than him. Vanner even had guts to speak in front of His Majesty, and that was something he would never dare do. But that did not mean that he did not want to be a better person. Ever since he decided to serve His Majesty, he had witnessed things far beyond his imagination. He had traveled on a concrete ship that could make its way upstream without sails, and he had attacked the nobles' capital city. He had also helped defeat the arrogant Church of Hermes and claimed the desert of the south and Grey Castle for his king. He had already seen so many things. So why should he be afraid of the demons? Suddenly the observer shouted, "Attention! Suspicious targets spotted at 10 o'clock." In the same instant, Fishball also noticed some indistinct black spots on the horizon. He pulled off the rifle bolt of the Mark I and raised its muzzle towards the sky. No one knew that he was still ashamed of what had happened 5 days ago. Only the blood of the enemies could help him was this disgraceful memory away. Chapter 928, Air Defense Battle at the Border, Part 2. Targets confirmed. The demons are coming. They're heading this way. They're coming from 2 directions. Demons also spotted at 12 o'clock. The observers of the different squads took turns watching their targets through the telescope, giving warnings continuously. Fishball's eyes were glued to the second group of enemies that appeared in the shooting area he was assigned to. The demons in his field of vision were tiny as the leaves flying in the wind, and only when the devil beast flapped its wings could they tell the difference between them and regular birds. Having learned by heart the firing procedures, Fishball placed one of the demons in his aiming reticule and then adjusted the heading indicator of the aiming tool. The new aiming tool on top of the gun looked very odd. It contained 2 concentric rings. One was equipped with a devil beast model that could spin, the other consisted of several paratactic tiny holes that could rotate with the model. Fishball knew nothing about the principles behind this aiming tool, but he knew that since His Majesty had designed it, it would be as fabulous as any of the other ingenious things the king had made. He spent a whole night memorizing every step he needed to go through before firing the weapon. The first step, he remembered, was to move the heading indicator, the devil beast model, to where it was parallel with the target. In a short amount of time, the enemy in the air is aligned with the tiny hole in the aiming ring. Right after that, he glanced at the model and shouted to his partner beside him, "A quarter." That meant the area of the target to that of the model was 4-to-1, indicating that the demon was in the shooting range of the Mark I HMG. Lord Astrologer of the Dispersion Star, who assisted in training the squads, had hammered it into them that any distances judged by the naked eye were bound to result in inaccuracies. It could only serve as a rough estimate of the range to the enemy. To ensure maximum effectiveness of the Mark I, it would be safer for them to round the distance up. That sounded easy enough for Fishball to understand. A premature spray from the Mark I would be guaranteed to hit the target, while firing too late might just waste bullets. After making the call, Fishball only needed to wait for his partner to find the corresponding number on the shooting table before he would pull the trigger. It only took a few seconds to finish this procedure, but the process felt excruciatingly long to him. As this was happening, everything around Fishball seemed to slow down for him, and the shouting sounds of his fellow soldiers in the background started to fade away. For a moment, he even heard his own rapid heartbeats and heavy breathing clearly. He could feel a slight amount of moisture in his palms. He knew that the cowardly fish ball was still inside him somewhere. But that only helped him steel himself for what was to come. As the demons flew steadily towards the wall, they gradually rose, going for the same pattern they executed 5 days ago. Now that they were at least 800 or 900 meters away, they fully extended their wings so that their bodies were as stretched out as possible. This made them such thin targets that even marksmen of the sniper team would be able to guarantee a clean shot on them. But we are different, Fishball thought. The scholar had told him of many principles, most of which was beyond Fishball's understanding. But he had remembered one point very clearly. Once the enemies are close enough to throw spears, you're free to aim and fire. But before they get in that range, you don't need to worry about hitting the enemies but rather just send as many bullets as you can in their path and wait for them to fly into the bullets. Use the fifth hole. At this moment, his squad mate behind him shouted. Fishball took a deep breath and raised the muzzle, placing the mad demon that he was aiming at in the fifth hole and pulled the trigger as hard as he could. Suddenly, a gush of flame flashed out of the muzzle. The sound of gunfire was ear-piercing, and it seemed to have resumed the flow of time which had previously appeared to slow down. Almost simultaneously, the other squads had also started to open fire. The area atop the city wall instantly heated up. This all felt rather bizarre to Fishball. The muzzle of the Mark I was not aimed at the demons but a vacant space in front of them. No one knew if they would hit the target. All they could do was keep their fingers tightly on the trigger and pray for the best as the cartridge box was emptied one bullet after another. Fortunately, this did not last long. After 3 seconds or so, a flower of red bloomed among the group of demons at their 12 o'clock. Along with the explosion of red, Fishball could also see a half-broken wing and body parts flying everywhere. The devil beast that had been shot were jolted and spun in midair, like pieces of thin paper being crumpled up. It was only then that Fishball got a rough view of the demon's appearance. However, from the scattering limbs, he did not spot any body parts resembling those of the mad demons. This unlucky devil beast must have been one of the ones who were responsible for carrying the red mist canisters. Subsequently, 2 devil beasts swayed away midair and dropped down like stones. Fishball could not tell from their movement whether they had been urgently dodging the bullets or seriously injured. But they failed to recover their speed and smashed directly onto the grassland. Apparently, the sight inspired the soldiers, who started to cheer rapturously. And another one. Partner, well done. Air Defense Squad, it's all yours now. Come on, kill those nasty things. Long live King Roland. The demons seemed to sense something wrong. They started to disperse and accelerate, charging towards the wall without any sign of retreat. 3/4. Fishball grabbed the gun handle tightly and kept adjusting the shooting direction. No, 4/4. The enemy in his vision was the same size as the model, meaning that the enemy was now within spear-chucking range. Open fire, the observer shouted, all gunners, fire at will. The soldiers armed with revolving rifles also joined and opened up at the approaching devil beasts. All the guns were blasting away, cracking continuously at the wall. For devil beasts were already shot down, however, ever since the enemies became aware of their attack and started to dodge the shots, few bullets succeeded in hitting them. At this moment, Fishball noticed a devil beast dart through the sky and dove towards him. As the deformed monster was snarling down at him from the air, he could faintly see that the mad demon raised up a bone spear and aimed it at him. A piercing chill instantly rose from the soles of his feet, crept through his body, and caused his hands to tremble involuntarily. Now that the demon in his vision was bigger than the model, he didn't have to estimate how far the demon was anymore, for this distance was short enough for the bullet fired by Mark I to maintain a perfectly straight trajectory through the air. All he needed to do now was to raise the muzzle, aim, and keep firing until the demon's body was riddled with bullets. But that spear would also pierce through his body without mercy. Flee or die. The familiar feeling crawled up like a shadow, and the cowardly Fishball seemed to have grabbed him by his hands. Ah! In the next moment, Fishball bellowed, "Go away! I'm no longer." At the same instant, the barrel of the gun spat out flames of death toward the demon. The bullets released from the gun whistled toward the demon, tore through its muscles, shattered its bones, and ricocheted in the demon's body before exiting the other side. The impact was so intense that its body swelled a little as its guts were smashed to smithereens. The mad demon threw the bone spear at the moment the bullets flew into him. Fishball had foreseen his ending when he pulled the trigger. But he did not let go of his finger. He stood firm even though he was trembling violently with fear. A coward! Bang! Just 1 meter away in front of Fishball, the shadow-like bone spear shattered as it flew into a semi-transparent barrier that had appeared out of nowhere. The barrier only shook a little but otherwise remained intact. Fishball finally came to himself and realized that a short-haired and short witch had appeared on the battlements and blocked the spear with her incredible power. "What are you shouting for?" She let out a long breath and slowly withdrew her hands. Then she turned around and smiled at him. "Of course you aren't." Chapter 929, Air Defense Battle at the Border, Part 3. Sylvie, who was observing the battle, could finally breathe out a sigh of relief. The mad demon's first volley this time did not cause as much damage as compared with their previous attack. With the help of the witches of the Sleeping Island, the spears were either blocked or strangely missed their targets. Only one spear managed to hit a heavy machine gun and shatter it, blasting the splinters everywhere. The explosion forced the squad to cease fire temporarily, but none of the soldiers were fatally wounded. Nana would be able to heal them all as long as they held on until the end of the battle. The mad demons had to let their swollen arms recover before they could attack again, while the First Army could just keep firing. The longer the demons stayed in one spot, the easier a target they became for the First Army gunners. Sylvie's knew then that the enemy's defeat was inevitable. The demons seemed to sense that too. As a horn rang out, the surviving devil beasts scrambled to turn around and accelerated away towards the west. Compared to the evasive movements the devil beasts displayed when attacking, the beeline they made in the air after turning tails turned them into easy targets for the soldiers. The hail of bullets managed to snap off one escaping devil beast's wing. The beast then fell into the misty forest with its body bent in an odd angle. By now, there were only 5 flying devil beasts left, and only 3 carried the mad demons. Sylvie informed the last of the Neverwinter attackers, who were currently lying in ambush, about this information through the sigil of listening. They were the last nail in the coffin for these demons. "Copy that," said a familiar voice from the other end of the sigil. "I'm on it. Enjoy the show of a great explorer. Be careful." Before Sylvie could even finish, sounds of wind whooshing past already blocked out the rest of her words. That was a signal of falling from the high sky, and an omen of death for the enemies. The last thing the demons controlling the devil beasts expected was that someone would attack them from above. They were proud of their natural ability to strike from the air. However, in the face of the witches above the clouds, the odds were not in their favor this time. Lightning accelerated so fast that the goggles started to crack. 120 kilometers per hour. That's almost twice as fast as Maggie in the devil beast form. If she flew any faster, the turbulent airflow would very likely blow away her wind goggles. What she needed to do now was no different than what she did to blow up the King's City. Adjusting the horizontal direction of the bomb so that it would hit the flying demons. But the bomb she carried this time was ashes. It was a tentative decision to add an extraordinary in the battle. Ashes could fly with the help of the Stone of Flight, but she could not fight while she was controlling the stone. It would be a waste to leave such a mighty warrior on the ground, so they finally came to a solution where the little girl would carry Ashes to attack the enemies. This operation turned out to be surprisingly smooth. Ashes could keep floating in the air by her will so that she would not be a burden to Lightning, and at the same time, the extraordinary's body was strong enough to bear the violent airflow due to high-speed flight. As they broke through the thick clouds, their vision suddenly cleared up. The 5 devil beasts Sylvie had told them about appeared in front of them. The enemies were still unaware of what was happening above them. Lightning mustered all her strength and threw Ashes towards one of them. Ashes unsheathed her long sword and slashed at the demon head-on. It was not until the demon had heard the blade whistling through the air did it finally become aware of the danger that was fast approaching. But by then, it was too late. The demon swelled its arm and put the spear in an attempt to parry the strike, but Ash's slash was unstoppable. Her sword cut through the spear before cleaving the demon in half. The last thing the demon saw was the extraordinary's pair of golden eyes. The rest of the demons were startled, and they screamed out as they made their devil beasts swerve to the sides. They all raised the spear, ignoring the devil beast whose master had just been slaughtered. At that moment, a terrifying roar distracted them. Woo! Oh oh! The giant devil beast that Maggie had transformed into dashed out of the thick clouds and swooped towards the demons. The enemies could not help but put their focus on the gigantic Maggie instead of Ashes. They knew that it was not a real devil beast, for they could see a witch on its back. Two spears hurled by the demons sped towards Maggie like a pair of shadows. The next second, the devil beast suddenly vanished and the spears passed through thin air. The demons then saw a white pigeon floating proudly where the devil beast had been. Coo! Just in a flash, Nightingale showed up in front of the enemies. Although the peculiarness of the misty world had restricted her movement in the air so that she could not act as freely as she could on the ground, she would not let any enemy within one flash escape. As long as the enemy was pulled in the misty world, Nightingale would dominate the battle. Without God's stones of retaliation, the demon would never see her. The devil beast Narrowback was as large as a town square to her. While Nightingale shot down the demon with her revolver, she pulled the reins on the devil beast that is now masterless and had it crash into the last devil beast still with a rider. The mad demon atop the last beast attempted a desperate struggle and threw two spears towards Nightingale while paralyzing its own arm. As the magic stone was flashing blue, it did not only drain the demon's magic power but also made half of its body wither up. Nightingale, however, did not even dodge the spears. She merely turned the black and white world upside down so that the sky became the ground. She then stood on the abdomen of the devil beast who, instead, took the spear for her. The turbulent misty world also concealed Nightingale and her mount. Then abruptly, the devil beast, controlled by Nightingale, smashed into the last pair of the enemies. The misty world absorbed the demon instantly. This was a strange world for the demon, and the distorted space and lighting of this world instantly distracted it. By the time the demon realized what had happened, the borderlines that were fine as silver yarn flooded over it like a tsunami. When the enemies reappeared, both the devil beasts and the mad demon had been minced into pieces, and their remains showered down to the ground below. Maggie retransformed into the beast and quickly caught Nightingale who was falling, while Lightning flew to catch Ashes, who had finished dealing with the other devil beast. 2-1, I win. Nightingale showed two fingers to the extraordinary. Ashes shrugged without a comment. After they landed safely on the ground, Lightning produced the sigil of listening from her bag. Sylvie, can you find the other two escaped devil beasts? There was a moment of silence before Lightning heard the answer. Yes, I see them. They are about 2,500 meters away to the northeast of you. Great, please guide me there. You want to go alone? No, Maggie'll go with me. Don't worry, Lightning said as she clapped her chest. They're just two beasts without a master. Noon will escape. Maggie returned to a pigeon, fluttered to the top of the little girl, and said with her erect bird head. Be careful with the red mist cans. Remember not to come into contact with the mist. Nightingale warned. Retreat immediately if you see any new enemies, Ashes added. Got it. You can count on me. Lightning raised a thumb and took off with Maggie, heading to where the enemies were fleeing. Chapter 930, A Letter from the City Hall. After waiting by the telephone for an hour and a half, Roland finally received the final battle report. The witches who were responsible for the ambush did not let any demons escape, and they also seized a lot of cans containing the red mist. Also, they acquired the corpses of the enemies shot down by the air defense squad, and Leaf also captured the final surviving mad demon was wandering around the misty forest. All in all, they had gained more from this battle than he had expected. First, and most importantly, the victory had boosted First Army's morale. The battle had let them realize that even though the demons were not an enemy that could be easily defeated like the knights or wild demonic beasts, they at least had the power to fight back. The demons that everyone had heard so much of was not supernatural and fearsome as the characters narrated in the old stories. In terms of defense, the demons, who were flesh and blood like human beings, were no better than the God's punishment army in front of His Majesty's powerful firearms. Second, the captured enemy would make the anti-demon propaganda in Neverwinter much more effective. Roland believed that once the migrants saw what the demons looked like, they would no longer discriminate against the witches. It was impossible for the demons, a kind of monster that shared none of the similarities with humankind, to brainwash the witches' minds and make the witches their servants. Lastly, the corpses of the demons would also be quite useful for research purposes. Since the magic blood could not save up separately and would lose its power quickly after the host had died, Roland had not counted on applying the enemy's blood to new sigils. But Celine had volunteered to take on the job of making sigils in Agatha's absence. Celine told him that Agatha was indeed among the most outstanding in the entire Quest Society, but the knowledge of sigil making was essential to every formal member of the society. She also stressed that apart from the quality of the magic stones and demon blood, the appropriate method of carving the vessels on the stone was also crucial to making a good sigil, albeit it being a less important factor. One could directly use a stick to draw a straight line if the time was limited, but carving intricate patterns on the stone would be able to fully bring its power into play. She was proud to say that no hands could be more exquisite and precise than her tentacles. In terms of sense of touch, control of strength, and not to mention the numerical advantage, the human hand was no match against her tentacles. As Celine goes on bragging about her tentacles, strange ideas kept popping up in Roland's mind, and it took him a long while before he could get back to reality. Fortunately, Celine could not read his thoughts when their minds were communicating. Otherwise, there would be no way for him to explain himself out of this. But of course, there was also the bad news. It turned out that the anti-air effectiveness of the Mark I type HMG was mostly unsatisfactory. By looking at the overview of the battle, Roland found that the hail of bullets fired when the enemies were closer to the wall was the most deadly. The demons, at first, did not expect that they would be attacked, so they flew and slowly cramped up into two tight formations. This made them perfect targets for the guns. However, out of the 12 devil beasts that came, only 4 were shot down by the guns. After the demons changed the tactic and started to disperse as they entered the effective range for the mad demon spears, no bullets succeeded in bringing any of them down. Fortunately, the demon's ideal range of spear throwing was about 200 meters, a distance short enough for the bullets of Mark I to keep a straight trajectory. After 3 more devil beasts were hit, the rest of the demons stopped fighting and retreated immediately. However, if the enemy's attacking range was farther, or if they chose to approach the walls in a more spread-out formation, this battle would have been much harder to win. After all, in the face of the enemies that could maneuver freely in the air, the disadvantages of the immobile defenders on the ground were apparent. Roland would try to improve the Mark I after this, but there were limited things he could do with the design. He might add a protective steel plate around the gun or convert the guns into small forts to protect the gunners. Also, he would increase the production of Mark I to deal with the war after the Bloody Moon arrives. However, Roland understood that there was no way for them to eliminate the Devil Beast's threat unless Neverwinter had a comparable air force. But let him put the concern aside for now. Roland put down the quill and let out a long breath. Finally, he won the air defense battle. No matter how insignificant it was, the battle would be regarded as the first battle in the human history that was won with the help of firearms. At the thought of that, Roland sent for Bear of Mons. Hold a celebration ceremony in the central square tonight. Make it as good and as lively as possible as the ones we have on Victory Day. It'll be a part of the propaganda. Do you understand? "Yes, Your Majesty," Barav responded with a hand on his chest. 5 days after the ceremony, Snaketooth received a letter from the city hall. Who was knocking? Tiger Claw slurred behind him. "Don't we rest today?" "Don't worry. It's not the foreman. Just go back to sleep." Snaketooth returned to the low table and craned his head to look out of the window. The sun had barely set, and there was still a faint trace of light outside as if a misty veil covered the sky. Snaketooth had been sleepy when he was awakened, but he could not be soberer now. Seeing the city hall's red seal on the envelope, he vaguely knew what was in it. His life had changed significantly in the past 1.5 years. After he moved in Border Town, he no longer had to live a rat-like life. Instead, he, like most people, started to make a living by himself. But, still, he had not believed such things would happen to him until he got his first pay, for he was so familiar with hirers who were notorious for exploiting their workers. Those corrupt people would cheat workers out of receiving their wages. This was especially so for a worker like him, who was a migrant. However, on the contrary, he got a full pay every month. So, now he couldn't even imagine how much his life would continue to improve in the days to come. With a salary of 12 silver royals per month, he could save up 1 odd gold royal for a down payment on the cheapest house in the residential area of Neverwinter. And if he took a part-time job, he might be able to buy the house much earlier. Now that he was clear about how long it would take him to achieve his goal, he started to look forward to it. As His Majesty's promises to the people were getting realized one after another, Snaketooth started to hope for more. Snaketooth carefully unsealed the letter and poured all the contents onto the table. There were 3 pieces of paper of different sizes and colors. The first piece was the thickest and palm-sized, with only a few words on it, but it made his heart thud. Without any doubt, it was an identity card of a formal Neverwinter citizen. Unlike the temporary card, this card was wrapped up by a transparent and hard film that gave a smooth touch. On it read not only his name and the day of his birth, but also a vivid portrait of him. Finally, he had become a member of this city, and a subject that was acknowledged by the king. Snaketooth tried to compose himself before he looked at the second piece of paper. It was a written notice. There were many paragraphs he could not fully understand, as he was only able to spend limited time on night classes since coming to Neverwinter, but he was able to grasp the general idea of the content. As he had expected, his application for participating in the railway construction in the Misty Forest was passed by the City Hall. Chapter 931, Your Name. The scuffling noises woke Tiger Claw up, and he yawned and scooched next to Snaketooth. "What's this? A letter?" Snaketooth immediately pushed Tiger Claw's face away, afraid that he would drool on the letter. "What's wrong? Why don't you get back to sleep?" "I'm hungry." "I want something to eat," Tiger Claw said as he rubbed his belly. "Then go boil some water and cook." "I want oatmeal, by the way." "Okay," Tiger Claw replied and then remembered something. "You haven't answered my question." "It's my identity card and an offer notice," Snaketooth said impatiently. "Oh?" Tiger Claw's eyes brightened and leaned in again. He threw one arm round Snaketooth's neck and shook him excitedly. "You finally got your ID card. Ha! This is worth celebrating. We need to have something better than oatmeal. Let's go to the market and buy some dried fish and mushrooms. I'm still trying to save money." "I can lend you some," Tiger Claw said unconcernedly. "You've been waiting for your ID card for so long. How could we just let this moment pass without a nice meal for celebration? Did you forget what you said the day I got my ID card?" Snaketooth knew he couldn't reject Tiger Claw's kind intentions. Tiger Claw was a tall and sturdy man. He worked hard and was often much more efficient than other workers, especially when he had enough food. His foreman was aware of this and started to value him more, and later even chose him to be the model worker of the 3rd construction team. He earned a higher wage and also got a bonus, so he actually had enough money to pay for the down payment of a house. Any migrants would get their ID cards if they gained permanent abode. The day Tiger Claw got the key to his new house and his ID card, Snake Tooth egged him on holding a feast for celebration and even moved his belongings into the new cement house. Okay. I got it. Snake Tooth said helplessly. Let's go later. Well, that's settled then. Tiger Claw was satisfied and returned to his bedside and rummaged for something to wear for shopping. By the way, what's in that notification? It's an offer from the railway construction team. Snake Tooth drew a deep breath and said, it won't be soon before I go to work in the barbarian land outside Greycastle's borders. What? Tiger Claw hands stopped abruptly. When did you apply for that? Why didn't you tell me? What if you insist on going with me? This house will then be left unattended. I wouldn't go with you. No. I mean, why would I go to such a dangerous place? Tiger Claw's voice raised. You know what happened recently. There are demons outside the city. The demons' recent attack on the city wall had stirred up major unrest amongst the citizens. At first, the alarm went off again and again, then, there were weird monsters dropping into the city, and then the ceremony held at that night was just mind-boggling to everyone. King Roland announced publicly that they were the enemies humanity will have to face sooner or later. He also stressed that the so-called barbarian land was not deserted at the beginning but instead a place that was once had a nicer name, fertile plains. That was where humans used to live. It was not until demonic beasts and demons started to harass them did people begin to retreat to where the four kingdoms are now. Some of the people who fled from the fertile plains established the church. They lied about the enemies, describing them as being omnipotent, and falsely accused the witches of being related to the demons, out of fear for their magic powers. But the victory Neverwinter had achieved this time proved that even though the demons were cunning and frightening, they were not invincible. To expand the territory and protect Neverwinter from the enemy's attack, the king decided to march on the barbarian land as soon as possible to reclaim the land that had once belonged to humans. The king's declaration during the celebration inspired countless cheers, and as the first army served meat porridge and roasts to the audiences, the atmosphere at the square reached its peak. In the next 5 days, you could hear people discussing about the demons everywhere you went. Snake Tooth's colleagues in the construction team were no different. They were the most interested in the topics like demon and demonic beast. Which one is stronger? Should Neverwinter expand to the northwest? Meanwhile, the city hall issued a series of recruitment announcements, one of which was the job of building the railway in the misty forest. Snake Tooth barely cared about the answers to these questions, yet he felt what His Majesty had said somehow enlightened his mind. Suddenly his mind became clear. He had never thought about where he had come from and where he would go. Now he finally understood that all of them had migrated from the barbarian land. The world was much larger than the four kingdoms, and its boundaries stretched far beyond the fertile plains, which by itself was several times larger than Greycastle. Also, he was tempted by the good pay. Tiger Claw turned around and grabbed Snake Tooth by his arm, and said, "You were always the insightful one, so I think you should understand this clearer than me. The demons are not as easy to deal with as everyone thinks they are. How could the demons drive humanity to the brink of extinction if they were weak? His Majesty said there used to be hundreds of cities and millions of people living on the fertile plains. Of course I know that. That's why I have made up my mind." Snake Tooth remained unmoved. "The pay is 35 silver royals per month, and they will even pay me the first 6 months' salary before I start work. Furthermore, I'll be eligible to buy a suite of 2 rooms. Chances like these are hard to come by." A suite of 2 rooms. Tiger Claw twisted his mouth. "You are really obsessed with that, aren't you?" "Of course." Snake Tooth made a fist. "It's got a hot water supply system, and the kitchen and bathroom are separated. That's what a house should be like." Although he did not get paid as much as Tiger Claw, he had saved up about 1 gold royal by now. Ever since he had seen their foreman's home, he had decided to buy a suite of 2 rooms of his own in the residential area in the inner city. But because down payment would cost him 3 gold royals, which was much higher than normal houses, he hadn't been able to do so. Most importantly, although Snake Tooth did not tell others, 2 bedrooms would be more comfortable for the both of them, unlike the single room where they had to share a small bed. Seeing that Tiger Claw was still trying to discourage him from taking on the job, Snake Tooth shook his head to stop him and said, "I know this is a little risky, but when we were rats, we took risks almost every day. The only difference was that most of the risks we took at that time ended up being in vain, while now we could at least ensure that our effort will pay off. You all think I have a quick wit, but that's scarcely useful in Neverwinter. If we wanted to have a safe and settled life, why did we move to a foreign city to begin with? You know that I can never win an argument with you." Tiger Claw raised his hands in surrender. "I have no objection as long as you have thought things through. Don't worry. I'm not so reckless as to care only about profit," Snake Tooth said as he spread his palm. "The First Army will be responsible for the security, and it's said that some witches will set out with the construction team. Even if we were to run into demons, they wouldn't make us fight the enemies with our poles and shovels. Relatively, it's a safe job." "I hope that's true," Tiger Claw muttered. "I'm going wash up. My stomach is growling. Now that you got a job with a better pay, I will make the most out of this meal." Snake Tooth rolled his eyes at that. As Tiger Claw was washing, Snake Tooth unfolded the third piece of paper and he was a little shocked by the content. It was a transfer contract. In short, it said that no matter what happened, the City Hall would not go back on anyone's salaries and rewards. The workers could choose any person to whom he or she would sign over their property in case of major accidents. That person would receive the notification from the City Hall as soon as the transfer contract is valid. Snake Tooth closed his eyes, some figures flashing through his mind: Joe, Sunflower, Tiger Claw. At last, the frame froze at a skinny, fair-skinned girl. Snake Tooth picked up the charcoal and wrote the name carefully in the blank space provided in the contract. Paper. Chapter 932, Someone Impossible to Meet. Horford Quinn stood in front of the French window with a filled wine glass in hand and stared at the city covered by the night sky. This was the center of the Kingdom of Dawn, also known as the City That Never Sleeps. The light started from the rising Sun Avenue and extended to both sides like a lush tree of light. At the top of the tree was the most famous market of the kingdom, where countless rare products were sold. For the merchants, the night was when their day started. To maintain the glittering glory of the city, the daily consumption of candles, firewood, and kerosene in the king's city was astonishing. The fish fat from the eastern harbor and the wood from the northern hills were continuously imported into the city ship after ship. This industry alone could feed nearly 10,000 people and more than 100 merchants. And this was only a small part of the commercial trade of this city. Normally, Horford's greatest pleasure was to enjoy the glow of the night city. Under the joint governance of John Moore's royalties and the three families, the city changed from a wasteland into today's famous bustling place. This was also due to the continual efforts of their ancestors. But today, he felt tired seeing all of this. The night scene of the City of Glow looked the same as before. It remained captivating and touching. Yet just outside the range of its glow was a dark undercurrent could no longer be ignored. Even while faced with such a brightly lit domain, he still felt a great deal of anxiety. Maybe he was getting old. Horford sipped his wine, but the bitterness in his mouth overpowered the wine's sweetness. "Father." The study door was pushed open, and a young man came in. "Baron Alphonse from Northwind City would like to meet you." "No," replied Horford, without turning his head. "Just say that I'm sick." "But..." He hesitated for a moment, then waved his hand at the old butler. The old butler immediately nodded, then turned and walked out of the study. Seeing that only two of them were left in the room, Hans started to voice out his worries. "Father, this is the 12th noble that you have rejected. Even I know that there's a problem in the palace. These foreign nobles' intention for entering the city was very obvious. If you refuse to see them, I'm afraid they will mistakenly think that." "Mistakenly think what?" "Mistakenly think that." He bit his lip and said, "that you're still on the side of His Majesty Appenmoya." "Han." Earl Quinn turned around and frowned at the heir to the Quinn family. Do you think it's a mistake that the three families are on the side of the King of Dawn? But now His Majesty no longer needs us, said Han, as he mustered up his courage. Since our army suffered a huge loss in Hermes, he no longer asks for your consultation. You're the Prime Minister, and you can't even enter the royal palace. And now even the patrol team has been replaced by mercenaries. Just look at the kind of people who are summoned into the palace these days. There are only clowns, dancers, and geishas. The Earl did not answer but just stared silently at his glass of wine. Han was only 18 years old, but even he could see what the arrival of the nobility from all over the country to the king's city meant. The other local nobles must have also already sensed the changes in the castle. In fact, when he learned of the defeat of their supposedly unstoppable army, he had already expected that this day would come. More than 10,000 troops and most of the lords of the towns were involved in trying to get a piece of fortune from the husk of the once mighty church. However, not only did they not earn any benefits, many of the troops even lost their lives. It would have been fine if that was the only consequence, but the King of Dawn had come back alive with his knightage in shambles. The news of Appin's shameful return had spread like wildfire as it fulfilled two conditions at the same time: the need for someone to be held accountable for this failed mission, and the fact that the power Appin held was no longer enough to dispel the greed of the other nobles. These nobles that sneaked quietly into the city at night gave out a clear signal. They undoubtedly wanted to see the reactions of the three big families before deciding whether to support or unite, but no one would ever agree to uphold the status quo. Horford could guess the thoughts of these people even with his eyes closed. Since there was such a huge loss of resources in Hermes, they would obviously try to find ways to make up for that loss. Father, Han spoke hurriedly as he saw that his father was silent. Things are not like they were 10 years ago, and Appin Moya is no longer His Majesty Moya. Look at the house of Luoshi. Otto Luoshi is still locked in the palace cell. You're the Prime Minister of the Imperial Palace, and you're held in high esteem by the people. If you make a stand and get the support of the two other big families, I'm sure the nobles will be happy to follow your lead. Make a stand? Earl Quinn's eyes narrowed and his voice portrayed a hint of danger. Han stammered, and he lowered his head in panic. He replied in defense of himself. You don't have to stand on the side of His Majesty Appin, right? Otherwise, why would you claim to be sick and refuse to receive anyone? If it were the old king, you would have personally persuaded those nobles to consider the stability of the kingdom first. Horford sighed and realized that his son was still too young. And if you're right, do you think that Appin Moya wouldn't have seen that coming? What? Han was stunned for a second. I bet there are eyes watching us just outside of our mansion. They're spying on who I've met and where I've gone recently, and Appin is kept well informed of this. The Earl returned to his desk and sat down. Imagine what would have happened to me had I just went ahead and met those nobles. Don't forget that even if he lost his entire knightage, the control over the kingdom still wouldn't be that much weakened. From the day Appin ascended the throne, he had already begun to change the guards and the castle guards to his people. Rebel right under his very nose? Do you think that those noble lords will come to rescue me when he puts the noose around my neck? He slammed the table. And now do you understand why the Luoshi family and the Tokat family hadn't come to find me, but only the foreign nobles? Horn gasped, then why don't you go back to the domain first? At least your knights and mercenaries are there, together with the recruited serfs, so even if he wants to plan anything against you. The Earl shook his head and said, the Quinn family has already settled down here for far too long. Our connections, distant relatives, productions, power. Even if I could slip out of the city alone, I wouldn't be able to bring everything out. Our people will suffer greatly at the hand of the king if they so much as make any suspicious moves, so I can't make such a rash move. In fact, my stay in the City of Glow is a guarantee in and of itself. Feigning illness was already the most that I could show. Other than that, there really isn't much that I can do. Being closely tied to the workings of the king's city used to be a source of pride for their family, yet it has now become the Quinn's fatal weakness. This was certainly a kind of irony. Really, but I don't think so. Just then, a strange voice came from outside. Horford's face changed drastically, as the speaker was obviously not a servant or guard of the household, as intruding upon them like that was a serious offense. How did this person get through the guards? Why didn't anyone respond when the person spoke? Who's that? Horn was equally shocked. He turned around in panic and looked for a weapon, but could only get his hands on a candlestick. It's me. The door opened, and a blonde-haired girl appeared before Horford Quinn. The strange girl for some reason looked familiar to him. Do you remember me? My lord. Chapter 933, The King's Orders. Earl Quinn froze, and he did not even realize that he had dropped the wine glass he had been holding. The moment he saw her, he couldn't help but think of the name of two people. One of the two had stayed by him for more than half of his life, but because she had lost someone she loved, she fell into a depression that eventually led to the end of her life. The other person was the love that was lost, and she was also someone he was supposed never to meet again. Nearly 10 years had passed, and even though she was now much taller and more beautiful, Earl Quinn could still recognize her. But the two had such a striking resemblance that he almost blurted out the wrong name. Father, do you know her? Han's words made him regain his senses. Horford stood up slowly and asked calmly, Are you Andrea? What? Are you saying that she's the one that had passed away? Horn stared back and forth between them as he muttered disbelief. Master, it really is Miss Andrea. The old housekeeper was more excited than anyone else in the room. I can't be mistaken. She has inherited all the characteristics of Madame. It seems like you remember me, said Andrea, in an expressionless manner. In that case, our negotiation will be much easier. Horford could not help but feel rattled in his heart. The fact that his daughter had awakened as a witch was a secret hidden from everyone. Even Andrea's mother, his wife Fancy, had no idea about this. When Andrea's maid had informed him about the incident, he instantly chose to drown the maid by pushing her into the river and had his men cover it up as a fake accident. Although he knew that doing so might make his daughter hate him forever, at least this way she would remember who her father was. But upon meeting again, the decision he made all those years ago had turned into a sharp thorn in his heart. This stabbing sensation became even more apparent as he started to question whether he made the right choice back then. But the Earl knew that there were more pressing matters now: why Andrea would appear in the City of Glow and whether her identity was true or false. Moreover, he couldn't figure out what she meant by "I don't think so." These questions were more important than pursuing past mistakes. He suppressed all the doubts and thoughts in his heart and waved at Horn. You can go out first. Father. Han responded worryingly. Just do as I said. Horford replied firmly. Seeing that he could not change his father's mind, Han left the room reluctantly. Don't alarm the others, the Earl said to the steward, and at the same time closed the courtyard door and put out the lights in the hall. If someone in the government asks, just say that I'm drafting some documents and that no one should be allowed to disturb me. Do you understand? I will do that right away. But... The butler touched his head and said, What about those friends that Miss Andrea brought? Friends? He glanced over at Andrea, suspiciously. Take them to the ballroom and take care of them properly. Yes, master. As the door shut with a squeak, the study suddenly plunged into silence. The pair stared at each other for a long time, until the Earl could not resist anymore and broke the silence first. Although you and my daughter are a bit alike, I can't confirm so rashly that you're Andrea. After all, she was only 16 when she left, and now 10 years have passed. He paused and said, Do you have other ways to prove your identity? In truth, he had already believed that this was his daughter, so the question was just to confirm that even the best kind of face-morphing abilities could not change one's soul. From her every move, the Earl could see the shadow of the flower of glow. Instead of answering, Andrea opened her hands, and a bow of magic power appeared in her palm. The glittering longbow converged and diminished little by little, evolving into a distinctive appearance that was a gift that he had made for his daughter's birthday a long time ago. At this point, Horford no longer had any doubt. This bow and arrow for beginners had long been destroyed together with the carriage, and even now he could not accurately describe its appearance. Andrea, who was especially interested in shooting at an early age, clearly still remembered this gift. "It's you," said the Count with a long sigh. "Why did you come back?" "I gave you away in the first place so that you could continue to live safely." "Was that the only reason?" Andrea retrieved the longbow and said, "Or were you afraid that outsiders would find out that the Prime Minister had a daughter that had fallen under the temptation of the demon?" "I didn't think I was being protected. It felt more like abandonment. There was no safe place for a witch like me. If it weren't for my luck that I got to meet a group of people who had the same fate as me, I would have died ages ago and who knows where." He opened his mouth but could not refute her argument because that was indeed one of his concerns back then. Once people found out that Andrea was a witch, the whole family would be in danger. Not everyone would be comfortable with sending their family to the church or the other nobles. Rather than let the entire Quinn family face this difficult choice, it would be better for him to make that decision alone. But those were all in the past, and I'm not here to dig up old wounds. Andrea said positively, "You must be curious as to how I could enter the Earl's residence so easily, even though the guards wouldn't easily believe my rhetoric. And when I saw the butler, I deliberately waited for a while outside the door. Is the one who called you father the heir to the family? When did I have such a brother? He came from a branch. Your mother died a year after you left, and the Quinn family needed a successor," Horford whispered. "If that incident did not happen 10 years ago, this position would have belonged to the eldest daughter." After hearing this news, Andrea was stunned at first, then her eyes started to turn dim. After a moment's silence, she spoke, "In any case, the family leader of the Quinn can't be changed at the moment, and His Majesty would like you to go one step further and not back down now. In the current situation, other than Earl Quinn of the three big families, he won't recognize any other agent." "What does that mean?" Horford was a bit confused about the meaning of her words. "The Majesty you referred to is, who else but the King of Grey Castle, His Majesty Roland Wimbledon. I've come here this time under his orders." Andrea took a deep breath and spelled out her next words one by one. "My lord, how do you feel about being the new King of Dawn?" Chapter 934, Rise of the Glowing City. "What are you saying?" Even Earl Quinn, who had been through countless storms in his life, was left completely dumbfounded by Andrea's sentence. But what he was surprised of was not her mention of a new King of Dawn, but that she was under orders of His Majesty Roland Wimbledon. These words carried a whole different meaning when said by different people. Han had essentially suggested the same thing earlier, but the Earl knew very well that the Quinn family alone had no way to rid Dawn of its current royalty. What Han meant by taking a stand was just an unrealistic fantasy. However, now that the one speaking had the support of the King of Grey Castle, those words carried more power. "Just as you have thought." Probably due to the news of her mother's death, Andrea's tone was no longer as sharp. "His Majesty Roland doesn't want to have Appenmoya stay on the throne, but nor does he wish for a destabilized kingdom. It's, therefore, necessary to support a new king with the backing of the populace to successfully control the situation as soon as possible." After confirming that he didn't mishear her first sentence, the Earl muttered, "But why me? His Majesty doesn't have many people that he can trust in the Kingdom of Dawn, so he chose me at first. But I refused." "Just because of this?" "Because the daughter refused, so the throne was thrown to her father." This kind of behavior was like that of a child's. But strangely, Horford did not think that this was a joke. Although Appen had completely banned people from talking about the defeat at Hermes, it was impossible to block the flow of all the information related to the battle because too many nobles had been involved with it. Horford knew very well that the enemy he encountered was not the church, it was Grey Castle that took over the holy city. The 10,000-strong army was defeated in an instant, and many of those who had survived could not even describe what happened during the battle. They only saw flames continually falling from the heavens amidst the chaos. The thunder-like flashes of fire smashed into their ranks, reducing both common serfs and armored knights into piles of ashes. If the news was anywhere near accurate, this meant that Grey Castle's power had far exceeded the expectations of the nobles. With such great discrepancy in military might, it would not be unreasonable for Grey Castle to appoint new kings for neighboring countries anyhow they liked. The only question left was why the king did not come himself. If the nobles in the Kingdom of Dawn were willing to group their forces under a single banner and start a rebellion together, the Earl would have definitely chosen this option. Andrea seemed to have anticipated that he would try to raise this question. Simply said, right now, His Majesty Roland has more important enemies to deal with, so he does not have the time nor resources to try to integrate the Kingdom of Dawn into Grey Castle in the next 3 or 4 years. After all, even though destroying the current ruling royalty was simple, restabilizing the country afterward would be a lengthy process. More important, enemies? Yes, the demons. Andrea said slowly. Autopsy should have already mentioned that all the church's actions were due to the news of the Battle of Doomsday. That was just a small part of the mystery. The name of this war was called the Battle for Divine Will and has lasted for nearly 1,000 years. After listening to his daughter's story, Earl Horford felt the cold sweat run down his back. The 4 kingdoms, including the Kingdom of Dawn, was merely a corner of a continent. As of now, humanity had already suffered defeat in 2 consecutive wars and was unable to stop the advance of the demons, and a 3rd defeat would lead to the extinction of humankind. Under such dire circumstances, Roland Wimbledon still dared to bear this heavy burden and go to battle with a mighty enemy to gain divine will. How much will and courage would a man need to do this? Just thinking about it was already enough to cause the Earl to forget to breathe for a couple of seconds. Why, said the Earl hurriedly. How would this benefit him? Does he not fear the consequences of failing? I don't know. Andrea sighed and said, this has been mentioned by Her Highness Tilly previously, but her speculation was even more puzzling. What did she say? She said that he's not doing it for humanity, but for himself. She hesitated and said, it was as if he was looking for a new challenge, and we just happened to be the beneficiaries in this situation. The Earl did not answer, because he did not know what to say. He had seen many different nobles, but none of them was anything like Roland Wimbledon. Eventually, he put this question aside and returned to the main topic. What does he require of me? To fight for him? No, Andrea shook her head. Your only job would be to maintain the stability of the Kingdom of Dawn and provide resources when needed. This includes manpower, raw and other kinds of resources. As for the specific amounts and types, His Majesty will later send someone to discuss with you in detail. Horford was relieved to hear that there was a price to pay for Grey Castle's support. If Roland wanted to support the Quinn family without asking for anything in return, he would certainly be suspicious of any conspiracies behind it. Of course, even if there was a conspiracy, with the current situation in Dawn, he could only bite the bullet and agree. Feigning illness was only a delaying tactic to reach a balance between Appin and the other nobles. If those nobles turned out to be capable of overthrowing the Moya family, Quinn's family would undoubtedly be excluded from the ruling circle of the king's city due to them just remaining a spectator. That would actually have been the ideal result. If anyone wanted to overthrow the 3 big families, it would not be at all difficult to spread rumors about them still owning allegiances to the royal family. This was a rare opportunity. Not to mention the involvement of Andrea. She might hate me, but she would never cause her family any harm. As soon as he thought of this, Earl Horford immediately made a decision. Please inform His Majesty Wimbledon that I'm willing to serve the King of Grey Castle. He spoke in a serious manner. Although he was speaking to his daughter, she was now the king's messenger, hence the Earl gave a slight bow according to the rules of the nobles. When would he like to take action? It would take at least 2 to 3 months to prepare for Grey Castle's troops to infiltrate the city. Even if Appin took away his power to run the patrol team, Horford was still confident about letting dozens or so Grey Castle men into the city. After all, as the Prime Minister who had served 2 different kings, his still had a certain degree of influence within the city. The Earl believed that those foreign nobles who wanted to persuade him over to their side also realized this point. According to the strength that Grey Castle had demonstrated in the previous battle they fought with Dawn's troops, dozens of the Grey Castle soldiers should be more than enough to take control of the city gate. However, Andrea's following words went far beyond his expectations. "Now that you've promised to our request, we will act immediately," she said lightly. His Majesty Roland had emphasized that he did not want a political assassination, but rather a complete defeat of Appen Moya in front of the public. Not only does everyone need to witness the end of the Moya family, the greedy nobles who had selfish intentions would also have to be convinced that any resistance is futile. What? He did not believe what he had heard. But how? Do you know how I got here? Andrea laid out her hands and said, "I came in from the main entrance. Those guards did try to stop me, but they couldn't do it." Horford immediately realized that the friends she brought were the key. Barging into the Earl's residence at the King's City was not an impossible feat, as this was not his home territory. But to do so without raising any alarms was quite astounding. This meant that the guards were most likely subdued within an instant. There is no doubt that this was not Andrea's doing, as each of those guards was armed with a god's stone of retaliation. Wait till you meet them. All of your doubts would naturally vanish by then. She continued and said, "So what the Quinn family needs to do right now is to cause a scene. The louder the noise, the better it is. Everyone in the glowing city should have their attention on this so that Appen Moya will have no choice but to come out and face you in public." Chapter 935, A Glimpse of Hope in the Dark. Otto Passy was woken up by loud noises. He struggled to lift his heavy eyelids and looked around. The candles on the candlestick had already burnt to the bottom, and the remaining flickers of flame weren't enough to light up the dark room. He could not tell day from night in this underground cell, and the candle became his only measure of time. The guards would replace the candles every 6 hours when they come to bring him food. But that was only in the beginning. Now they seldom came, be it with candle or food. Sometimes, he would wake up from hunger and find that the cell was still completely dark. How long had he been locked here? Otto pressed and shook his forehead, trying to squeeze out any last bit of remaining energy. The prolonged lack of sunlight had made him haggard, and constantly waking up in an isolated and pitch-black environment made him feel helpless and abandoned. As if he'd forgotten by the world. But he must live on. Because both his father's entire Luashi family's fates are in Appen's hands. Otto propped up his frail body, rolled out of bed and limped slowly to the railings. Other than replenishing the plates and jugs, he also hoped that the caretaker could give him a razor blade. His long unshaven beard had long since covered his cheeks, and bits and pieces of leftover food and grease could be found stuck there. Over time, his face smelled like rotten orange peels. If his caretaker were worried about the blade being a potential weapon, Otto wouldn't even mind letting the caretaker shave him instead. After all, he was still a noble, and the request for grooming shouldn't be something unreasonable. Otto then heard the sounds of a conversation outside the iron gate. What were those people thinking? The person imprisoned here is the eldest son of the Passy family. The ones who were speaking did not try to cover up their voices, so it seemed that they did not mind their conversation being heard by Otto. Jokes and ridicule. Isn't that what clowns do? Are they crazy? Normally, if these acrobats dared to offend the Earl's son, I'm afraid that they would be fed to the fishes next day. They're nothing more than a group of homeless wanderers. Well, that was when times were normal. Back then, would the eldest son be kept in the dungeon? Now His Majesty likes to see these guys perform. Without the approval of the King of Dawn, I don't think they would dare to do such a thing. Pooey, you're just speaking nonsense. I'm just saying. You don't have to believe me, and even if you don't, what can you do? Are you going to trade dinner with that lord in the cell? Sigh, forget it. It's just a few mouthfuls of saliva. He won't die from eating it. Then the sound of a bunch of keys jingling around could be heard. That's right, and if this is what His Majesty wants to see, they aren't you just asking for trouble? Go ahead. I still have to retrieve the food tray. The iron gate made a screeching sound, and the warden walked in while holding a tray of food. "Oh, my lord, you're already awake?" He was a little surprised to see Otto already leaning against the railings, but he quickly hid his awkward expression. "Well then, you might as well finish up today's dinner now. I'll change the candles tomorrow. The chief steward forgot to send new ones over." Otto did not answer. He suddenly felt his heart fill with sorrow, and he even forgot to request for a razor blade. Although the exchange between the two people was short, he was still able to figure out the gist of the conversation. The clown of the circus troupe happened to bump into the man who was responsible for delivering his food, and he spat a few mouthfuls of saliva into his food in an attempt to amuse App and Moya. The shame made his cheeks burn as if they were being baked in an oven. The warden did not care about Otto's reply and quickly changed the dinner tray before leaving soon after. Although the room was decorated like the room from a duke's mansion, the sense of repression that could be felt inside was unbearable, and no one would want to spend more time in there than they needed to. As the footsteps went away, the silence once again washed over Otto. In that very moment, he wanted to scream out loud, curse the warden for his negligence in duty, and reproach Appin for his ignorance, yet he did not do so. Because that would be meaningless. The former would only delay the next replacement time of the food and candles, while the latter would just gladly let him fall into the trap of his old friend. As for the dinner that was used to humiliate him, he had no intention to touch it. Otto could not help but wonder if he had been doing the right thing. Just as he was ready to go back to bed, his whole body suddenly started trembling. In the corner of his eye, the oatmeal started to turn into a bowl of black water. Passy's eldest son rubbed his eyes, slowly moved closer to the plate, and carefully lifted the bowl of oatmeal. That was not an illusion, nor was it the shadow of the weak flame. The oatmeal had turned black, like some thick ink. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. Acrobatics troupe, clowns, tricks, was all this arranged by that person? Yorko said you were an ordinary acrobat. Is that true? How did you come to know His Majesty, Roland? It was a coincidence. As to why His Majesty would choose me was probably because my acrobatic performance wasn't bad. Oh, can you demonstrate it? Okay, I'll perform the simplest trick of the thief who spits ink. Otto stared blankly at the oatmeal for a moment and suddenly inserted his finger into the bowl. After groping around for a little while, at the tip of his finger, he could feel a rough touch. How did this happen? Why did the water suddenly change color? It's not done yet. Look at this chiffon. Can you see there's nothing on it? Now I'm going to put it in the water to make it wet and then use the fire to dry it. Guess what will happen next? There's nothing, right? Wait, that's a word? Can you see what's written? Let me see, is this your name? You're right, Hill Fox is my name. Otto gently pinched that rough item and slowly pulled it out of the oatmeal. It looked almost transparent, and he couldn't tell if it was immersed in the oatmeal. The chiffon could only be felt with his fingers. He held his breath, walked quickly to the candlestick, and spread it out a little. The faint black watermarks began to fade, while the candlelight started to waver. Hurry, 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 hurry up. His heart was shouting anxiously. The swaying shadow seemed to come from all directions, and it was as if the black chiffon he held in his hands was the only light in the whole world. At the moment the letter marks appeared, the candle went out. Darkness then engulfed the entire dungeon. Otto could not help but laugh heartily. He pressed down on his trembling shoulders and stuffed the chiffon into his mouth. Then he crawled back to the railing and swallowed it with the oatmeal. The warmth spread through his throat and stomach and filled his whole body with strength. However, compared to the oatmeal, it was his heart that felt warmest. As he drank the oatmeal silently, a tear rolled down from the corner of his eye. His determination was finally worth it. There were only a few words on the chiffon. They were written with beautiful handwriting and gave him a nostalgic feeling for his childhood. Don't be afraid. I'm coming. Chapter 936, Close Combat. What did you say? The King of Dawn pushed away the dancer in his arms as he suddenly stood up. The dancer, a beautiful woman with nothing more than a pink silk scarf wrapped around her half-covered body, fell to the ground. Though she was hurt badly, she did not dare to voice out her pain. The rest of the servants, performers, and jugglers also lowered their heads in panic. The entire palace abruptly became silent. "Your Majesty." The Secretary of State gulped and said, "Your Prime Minister has rebelled." "Are you sure he has truly rebelled and isn't just supporting those idiots on the outside?" Appin didn't know whether it was him who had misheard his minister or it was the fault of his staff blowing the news out of proportion. Of course, he knew about the plans of those traitorous nobles. Everyone who had returned alive from Hermes had witnessed the destruction of the king's personal knightage as well as his miserable escape. It would have been naive of him to expect them to remain loyal to the royal family. Some amount of rebellion was only to be expected. Gathering support and forming alliances with the three major families in the royal capital would clearly be their first choice. Appin had long been wary about this, but he believed that, going by the characters of the three old veterans, they would most likely play by the rules and lie low behind closed doors. After all, the king's city was still in his hands, and any act of defiance was tantamount to suicide. He did not expect that the first to cause a problem would be the Quinn family. The collision with the smaller lords had already violated Appin's bottom line. Perhaps the old earl just wanted to leave a way out for himself or make a stand. But no matter what the reason was, punishment was absolutely inevitable for such an impertinent act. For example, Otto Luashi, Appin had already shown mercy by not killing his childhood friend on the spot. But, what does rebelling mean? Earl Quinn is still in the city of Glow, and he has neither subjects nor soldiers here. Does he want to rebel with just his dozen or so guards alone? That would be ridiculous. How would he be able to rebel? The Earl did contact the other nobles, but not in secret. He issued an invitation. The minister wiped the sweat from his forehead and said, and he publicly invited all the nobles to his mansion to persuade them to support the Quinn family. Appin was stunned and almost unable to understand the news he had heard. This move could indeed be perceived as a rebellion, but the way he did it was incredible. Instead of asking for help from the nobles, he's asking them to support the Quinn family. Does Horford really know what he's doing? He had already become a dangerous vessel that could sink any time. How could he still think about getting the support of the nobility? This act was undoubtedly going to turn both sides into bitter enemies, and there was no way Moya could ever tolerate such a grave act of provocation. The sheer stupidity of the situation would only make those nobles look down on him. But still, was the Prime Minister such an arrogant person in the past? Appin brooded silently for a long time before finally saying, "Pass my orders down. Commander Duke Batchev is to lead the patrol team to the Earl's residence, arrest Horford Quinn, and bring him in front of me. Everyone else in his residence is to be temporarily locked up in custody. If anyone opposes him, he may kill them on the spot. I would like to see how the Earl is going to explain this." "Yes, Your Majesty." After this news, he was no longer in the mood for seeking pleasure. He dismissed everyone in the hall and sat paralyzed on the throne. He didn't really want to drown himself in pleasure, but once the surroundings became quiet his ears would echo once again with the roar of the sky thunder. The war that ended more than a month ago had left a deep impression on him that he could never forget. No. It was not a war, but a one-sided massacre. His troops had no strength to fight back. Whether it was the knights or the serfs, it made no difference when they were faced with the attack from Grey Castle. After he got back to the king's city, Appin found that he no longer had the courage to confront Roland. The failure on the battlefield caused him even more heartache than the death of his father. What made things even worse was the fact he knew that the Moya family had effectively lost the entire kingdom of Dawn. What was the fate of offending a powerful neighbor? There was no doubt that, sooner or later, the other party would annex the country that he inherited from his father, and there was nothing he could do about it. When he ascended the throne, he was full of ambition and was bent on governing this kingdom well. He wanted the citizens to live a stable life, and no longer have to worry about witches, demonic beasts, or other foreign threats. But just a year after he took over, and he was already completely disillusioned and had lost interest in political affairs and commerce. He was just waiting for the enemy's army to attack and leave him hanging on the city wall. As he thought about this point, Appin's hatred toward the king of Grey Castle kept growing immensely, and he wanted to eat him alive. If not for Roland Wimbledon, he would have left a mark in the pages of history as a famous leader of his generation. All this was the latter's fault. Grey Castle's new king had been bewitched by witches. He slammed his palm on the armrest, and the burning fire in his heart had nowhere to be vented. When Earl Quin has been captured, I will make him have a taste of a king's anger. However, in the afternoon, his newly appointed minister ran into the palace in a panic. "Your Majesty, Sir Batchev is dead. The patrol. The whole army is gone." "What?" The King of Dawn grabbed his collar in shock. "Did they have traps set up in the mansion? Or did they hide in ambush?" "Yes, they had hidden bodyguards," the minister quickly replied. "I saw it with my own eyes." At first, Batchev asked the Earl to come out and barge directly into the house after being denied. But he was immediately killed by the Earl's guards. Not only that, these guards also rushed out of the courtyard and ambushed the patrol team that was outside the mansion. They were like madmen. They had all kinds of weapons in their hands, including boning knives, wooden sticks, and even stone bricks. In less than half a minute, the platoon collapsed. How many people did they have? Probably 7 or 8. Bastard. Appin struck the minister to the ground. "You call 7 or 8 people an ambush? In the city of Glow, even a businessman has a dozen guards. Have you been scared out of your wits? The patrol team has about 100 or 200 people. How can they be defeated by 7 or 8 guards? Even 200 wild boars wouldn't fall so fast. Don't tell me they can't even compare to pigs in the hunting grounds? Your Majesty, those people aren't human beings. They're monsters," the minister cried out his grievances. Most of the patrol team couldn't even block a single one of their blows. That wasn't the strength and speed of a man. Appin suddenly jerked up his head. He seemed to have seen this type of scenario before. That's right. He remembered now that his father's killers, the 2 pure witches from the church, had shown him the terrifying prowess of the God's punishment army. Could Earl Quin be connected with the church? An uncontrollable anger suddenly rose from his heart. "Rizeth!" Appin yelled. A knight came in quickly from outside the hall and knelt on one knee. "Your Majesty, what may I do for you?" "Immediately summon all the mercenaries in the city of Glow and bring in the crossbows and rockets. I want you to burn Earl Quin's residence to the ground." He yelled, "I want them all to be burnt to ashes regardless of whether they are human beings or monsters." "But that's the inner city," the knight hesitated and said. "If it causes a big fire, I'm afraid it will be difficult to control it." "Shut up and do what I say." Appin growled hysterically, "If you don't burn him, you don't have to come back to see me." Even the God's punishment army, when faced with an opponent 100 times their number and armored with crossbows, would not have a chance of victory. If they wanted to collude with the church, they would only be facing death. The next day, the King of Dawn once again received news from the watchdogs that the entire mercenary group that had been prepared the night before had failed to even reach the Earl's residence. While passing through the Rising Sun Avenue, the mercenary team was attacked by an acrobatics troupe. He had to make sure he hadn't misheard the minister's report. An acrobatics troupe performing on the street suddenly attacked the mercenaries in the middle of their performance. The mercenaries caught off guard and suffered heavy losses. It seemed those actors fought the same way as Earl Quin's guards. But this time, the weapons in their hands were no longer random debris. They were wielding the daggers, iron hammers, and wooden shields that had belonged to the former patrol team. Chapter 937, The Sting. In the next few days, the situation had changed so rapidly that it was beyond everyone's expectations. People in the King's City had never thought that they would witness such a scene. The Quin family, who had served the royal family of Moya for hundreds of years, publicly opposed Appin Moya. This was not a secret conspiracy, nor a conflict of interest between noble families which civilians simply could not understand. Everything was on the table. The Prime Minister of the city of Glow stood in front of everyone and publicly declared his ideals and purpose, which was overthrowing the rule of the incompetent tyrant and promising a bright future for the Kingdom of Dawn. In his speech, the Earl exemplified the signs of the decline of the city and the tyranny of the new king for more than a year, and he used precise evidence to describe the inevitable fall of the Kingdom of Dawn. Since no noble ever told the people the principles and inside information of running the domain, and the speaker was the Prime Minister who had served the king for over a decade, his acts surprisingly caused a heated discussion. From the auction house of the Chamber of Commerce to the taverns on the Black Street, nearly everyone was talking about it. I have heard that hundreds of people starved to death in the slums last year. It turned out to be caused by the reduction of cultivated land in the outer cities. In actuality, more people died in the outer cities. There is nothing wrong with His Majesty's decision to occupy the land for the expansion of the palace, but the Earl said that the amount of grain saved is gradually decreasing. What should we do? No wonder the price of food is so much higher recently. I heard that the peasants in suburban towns were forced to serve in the army. Now that the army was defeated, few people are able to come back. Doesn't that mean that the food prices will be even higher? Oh, I hope we won't starve during the months of demons this year. Well, do you want to support Earl Quinn? He has promised, if his promises hold, that there will be no need to worry about the food in the City of Glow and everyone will be able to get enough food in the future. Hey, I didn't say that. The speech of the Prime Minister quickly spread throughout the City of Glow through these discussions. Quite a large portion of the people were doubtful about the contents of the propaganda, and it was the conflict itself that drew their close attention to this issue. How often could they witness the conflicts between the great nobles and the royal family of Moya? For the general public, they usually only heard, from the tavern, the exaggerated and modified rumors or boast of the nobles. These days it was simply too exciting for them. This was not a show of drama, but a real treason. King Appin did not remain indifferent. He had ordered several groups of men to stop Earl Quinn, all of which ended in failure. Earl Quinn possessed advantages beyond imagination, and an incredibly powerful guard team became his solid shield, which not only defeated the king's team in spite of a numbers disadvantage, and expanded from a dozen to 40 or 50 members. What was more exciting was that the Earl explained his plan directly. He would move the frontier line 200 meters toward the castle district every day until the King of Dawn gave up his throne or was forcibly removed off the throne. In other words, the confrontation would come to an end in 5 days or so. Bang! Bang! Appin threw everything from the desk onto the carpet. The delicate room became a mess, but it could not quench his anger. Damn! When did I occupy the farmland outside the city? Isn't it the problem which my father ordered him to investigate? How dare he blame me for the cause of uncivilized suburban villages and towns? It's Roland Wimbledon's fault. He almost roared, it was his witches who killed them, not me. Your Majesty, please appease your anger. The Minister-in-Chief Knight said, now the most important thing is to stop the pace of Horford Quinn so you can dispel his arrogance. The nobles in the kingdom are waiting for your move. I should have thrown them all into jail at the very beginning, Appin thought in anger and then asked, how many people do we have now? There are still 1,500 knights, lifeguards, and mercenaries in the palace. And if we use the maids and servants, then we have an additional 2,000 hands. The chief knight replied, outside the castle district, the stone wall can block the enemy. Though it's not as thick as the city walls, they can stand on it and easily kill the enemy even without much training. Originally, he intended not to show his hand until he dealt with other lords, especially since the palace lifeguards were nearly as strong as the knights and were equipped to teeth. He had begun to cultivate them before his father passed away, but now he had to use them in the defense of the palace. Bring the boxes in the vault and tell the servants that they can get a reward of 100 gold royals as long as they kill a monster. Appin said, gnashing his teeth, if they can stop the treason, I'll give them titles and domains. Or promote them if they already have. Yes. The God's punishment warriors of the church were not impervious to blades and spears, which he had confirmed from the pure witches. Even though the monsters were powerful, it was impossible for them to remove the entire stone wall by hand. As for the fact that the monsters were increasing in number, it must be a trick played by Earl Quinn. He must have arranged for them to hide somewhere beforehand, and then disguised themselves as if he had more and more helpers. No noble would believe that there were so many fierce warriors in the city of Glow and that they did not emerge until now. The stupid civilians might believe it, but their opinions had little effect on the situation. Has Horford gotten the support of other nobles yet? Appin turned to the minister. The latter immediately became embarrassed and replied, well. Speak. It is rumored that black money started to come into contact with Earl Quinn, but the specifics of the situation is still not known yet. Those greedy wolves. Appin clenched his fist and angrily said, my father treated their underground kennel as part of the market. In my opinion, I should have confiscated their property much earlier. However, he also knew that he could do nothing but express his anger. The organizers of black money were all rich businessmen in the city of Glow, and their status was no lower than that of the great nobles. Moreover, a large amount of wealth accumulated by the Moya family came from those people. In addition, the Tokat family has openly supported the Quinn family, the minister swallowed and said. But your majesty, please don't be too worried. I heard that the Luashi family had rejected Horford Quinn's invitation several times. These were the three families which my father was so proud of. Appin sneered silently and thought, now two of them have become traitors, even faster than those minor nobles who are sitting on the fence. And the reason why the last family doesn't act is because Otto Luashi is still in my hands. But this might be his weapon. Send someone to tell Earl Luashi that if he wants to prove his innocence, he must immediately bring his knights and squires to support the palace, said Appin coldly. Otherwise, I will not show any mercy toward the rebellious family. It will be done. The minister quickly replied. For hours later, the King of Dawn received a message that Earl Luashi was willing to comply with his demands, which made his anger somewhat abate a little. He managed to mark a little comeback in the face of bad news. Appin did not care too much about Luashi's knights. Most importantly, he knew that the younger generation of the three families was close friends. He wondered whether they would still be lying with the family when they knew one of them would die if they opposed to the king. This was undoubtedly a stinger which they could not remove. Soon, the deadline announced by Horford Quinn, the Prime Minister, arrived. Chapter 938, The First Shot. When dawn's light shed over the city walls and into the inner city of the king's city, it showed that everywhere in the city was crowded with curious people. It had never been so busy and lively in the city of Glow. This was different from the auction exhibitions which were only available for the rich tradesmen and nobles. This was a carnival for all the people in the city. They originally had no connection with the upper class. Even the knights, the lowest level of nobles, were superior in their eyes. However, they now had an opportunity to witness the changing of power at the highest levels. Especially when they followed Earl Quinn's team to move forward, they even had the illusion that they were also making the change. Now, few people mentioned the word treason. Instead, it was replaced by fighting for the throne. This battle would give a clear answer to who would be the ruler of the Kingdom of Dawn. It seems that in everyone's eyes, your reputation is extraordinary, said Hill Fox, who was riding a horse side by side with Earl Quinn. I thought the public opinion won't change until you occupied the castle district. That's probably because I have reorganized the patrol team and dealt with the domestic affairs of the country for half of my life, the old Earl said with a sigh. Is this also what you gathered when you ran the circus? Although Hill Fox was just a civilian without any title and the status of an acrobatics troupe performer was even inferior to a freeman, Horford did not dare to despise him. According to what Andrea said, Hill was the real representative of the King of Grey Castle, and he had a higher position than Yorko the ambassador. After Yorko retreated, Hill did not leave. Instead, he began to run several acrobatics troupes. This way, he hid his identity and scattered eyes and ears to every corner of the city. In the face of such a skilled man who was deeply trusted by Roland, he had to show his respect even though he was an earl. In addition, he also needed his help at the moment. The wishes of the civilians are very important, my lord. Hill nodded. In the eyes of the great nobles, they may only be humble grains of sand or tax-offering lambs, but sometimes the sand will bury people and lambs can ruin the herdsman. If this occurs in Neverwinter, I think the result probably will be completely different. What will happen in your opinion? Earl Tokat, who was riding on the other side of the Prime Minister, curiously asked. As long as there is such a sign, the people will already report the revolters to the City Hall before His Majesty does anything, Hill replied with a smile. Hill. Sir, Oro Tokat, Adoluashi's good friend, coughed and pointed to the team following them. Did you summon the rats following behind us? I happen to have some connection with their chief, Hill frankly said, so what do you think of it? This gathers much more momentum for us. That's right, the old Earl thought, after wearing the leather armors offered by Black Money, the team of over 1,000 rats looks quite plausible. Otherwise, his team would not be such a deterrence since there are only about 40 extraordinary warriors, as well as the guards of Earl Tokat and his own. However, rats were useless in other aspects. Moreover, as a great noble, he felt quite uncomfortable to march together with the rats on Black Street. In addition, the rats were infamous for being double-crossers and asking for more than they should. Earl Quinn wondered what kind of deal Hill made with them. Don't you worry that they may rebel, asked Oro, who apparently could not hide his feelings. You know that they're not unfamiliar with betrayal. That also depends on what they can get. Hill turned to Earl Quinn. I promised them the identity of freemen in your name. If you successfully become the King of Dawn, they'll be rid of the unstable life and become the citizens of the City of Glow under your protection. Horford could not help frowning and said, although the rats are indeed hated and despised by most people, the real reasons why they are degenerates are because of poverty and hunger rather than the recognition of others. If this isn't changed, even though I can spare them of past crimes, the new identity is useless for them. They'll become rats again sooner or later. Since these people are willing to take such a risk to get an identity, they're not stupid or lazy. Maybe they just lack an opportunity. Hill replied casually, as for the cause of degeneration, rest assured. When His Majesty's messengers come next time, you'll find that there are much more job opportunities than you expect, and you don't need to feed them. Because they'll feed themselves at that time. The huge crowd walked through the market and entered Rising Sun Avenue. The wall of the castle district was right before them. Behind the stone wall was where the Moya family had lived for generations. Looking at the palace and high tower where the dawn shone, Horford suddenly became nervous. He had been the Prime Minister for over a decade and had experienced too many twists and turns. Except for the moments where he found that his daughter was a witch and Fenancy died of disease, he seldom felt so unease. Today, he stood at the threshold of a new field out of luck. Even though the real ruler would be the King of Grey Castle while he would be just a king in name, the Quinn family would reach the pinnacle of nobles, which was, to become the royal family of a country. He had disobeyed the advice of his ancestors, but he also made it possible for his family to reach a new summit. In such a complicated mood, the old Earl could not help asking, is it really okay to let my daughter participate in this battle? Of course, you may not know, but Andrea is no longer the noble lady who couldn't leave without your protection. She's now an outstanding combat witch and she'll fire the first shot of the siege. Hill smiled, please prepare your speech before the final attack. It's not to the extraordinary warriors and rats, but to the people who accompanied us here. Tell them that the new age of the Kingdom of Dawn is coming soon. Andrea stood on the top floor of the belfry, observing the palace in the wind. This was the only place in the inner city where she could overlook the stone wall of the royal palace, though it was about 600 meters away. From afar, it seemed that she could embrace the grand palace in a hug and the people in it were little ants. For the castle district, this was an absolute safe distance. Even a heavy catapult could not threaten the stone wall here. From here, she would open a gap for the gods' punishment witches in the battle. Just then, she saw a red flame flying upwards over Rising Sun Avenue, which was a sign that indicated the start of the battle. She took out the bolt rifle, which was specially made by Miss Anna, loaded the 10-bullet clip, opened the aiming lens, and raised the gun. she saw a fully armored knight. Andrea took a deep breath and began to control the magic power in her body. It was a wonderful feeling. The magic power seemed to turn into a pair of gentle hands that lightly held her arms, elbows, and fingers. In such an embrace, she felt that she entered a mystical state, as tough as a rock and as light as a feather. The former made the weapon in her hands undisturbed, while the latter made her become part of the wind, swaying gently with the breeze touching her cheeks. When the two combined into one, Andrea snapped the trigger. With a great roar and heat, the high-speed revolving bullet flew out of the barrel and fell toward the stone wall.